if your body is, kind of stuck in quotations in like that defensive position, shoulders rolled forward, maybe I build up my biceps and my pecs and my abs, like, going to I'm like an armadillo in the front, like full protection.
Yeah.
That body has a meaning. It's like there's a reason that person went to the gym and did those things. There's a reason they were attracted to those exercises. There's a reason they were attracted to those magazines and those supplements, and there was an agenda behind that, whether it was conscious or subconscious, whatever, it doesn't matter. In order for the person to structurally create change, they need to be able to emotionally create change, and they need to be able to create change that filter that they perceive the world through.
So I use an app to get audiobooks, and the longest wait I've ever seen for an audiobook was 18 weeks for Marie Kondo's The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. Then I went looking for your book, and there was a 22-week wait for your book.
Oh, that's great.
What do you think is creating all this demand for your topic?
I don't know. I feel like that's probably just like a glitch with Audible or something, to be honest. But, I think that presently we've had so many conversations around nutrition and around, various different environmental factors like phthalates in the water bottles, or or maybe loneliness, or maybe cell phone stuff, or EMF, electromagnetic frequencies. And there's all these different potential variables of what is causing Western culture statistically to go into directions of like increased incidences of diabetes and obesity and depression and anxiety, and depression's the number one leading cause of disability worldwide, and like all this different stuff. It's like that's a very fire and brimstone perspective. When I look into the world, I also see a lot of hardworking people, compassionate people and strong people, and I see a lot of good things as well. But a conversation that I think there's been a deficit around is how our movement plays into our physiology, and how it plays into our thoughts and emotions, and even memory, like the way that we access memory acquisition. There's various different research that we include in the book. From the one place particular was from San Francisco State University, and they had various different. They had two groups of students. One group was standing in a hunched over position, and then in that position they say, okay, go back into your memory banks and kind of just see what comes up.
Right.
And when you put yourself into that, what would be perceived as being like a hunched over, kind of like depressed from an outward perspective position, it's easier for a person to access more depressive memories. And then when a person goes into the inverse of that, and goes into more like an upright, strong, in the book we call it the aligned archetype, it's easier for them to access more like times that I felt good, and times that I felt confident, times that I felt strong and creative and safe. Yeah. And so the movement spoke, and the human experience wheel is something that I think is there's a deficit around like the mind-body connection there. And I think that people want to feel good in their bodies, and they want to feel autonomous. They want to feel like they know how to drive this thing. And I think that the model that we have been raised up in, like the allopathic model of medicine, is a little bit more like we go out to get fixed. Yeah. And I think people are, in general, like, I think that illusion is starting to become a little bit, the veil is becoming thinner. And people are excited, I think, to, take care of themselves. Yeah. Like I can do this, as opposed to waiting for the pill or waiting for the biomechanical leg replacement thing, whatever.
Some nanobot thing that's going to fix us all.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's like the nanobots aren't going to do it. Like the complexity of your body is so much more vast than what we're going to be able to, from my perspective. I may be totally wrong. But I think that once the magic of your human physiology is so much more vast and complex than what I think we're going to be able to outsource to nanobots. I think there's going to be a whole sequel of issues that are behind that, from the outside, it's like, oh yeah, of course you just throw it in there and it just eats up all the cancer, eats up what it's like. Well, but then what's your physiology's or your biology's response to that bot in the first place? Or, it's going to kind of that conversation kind of go in the weeds, but going the other direction and saying like, what if I just focus on what I have, and maybe my thoughts have effect on my cells. Maybe the way that I breathe has an effect.
Right.
Maybe the way that I use my eyes has an effect. Maybe my body language throughout the day impacts all this stuff.
Yeah, that's a huge one, is the posture thing too. Like a lot of people get pumped about, I'm going to go to the gym and start a new workout routine. But as you explain in the book, and I've heard you talk about in other podcasts, like you talked about something in another podcast where if you had pictures of people on their phone and you subtracted the phone, it would look like they were the saddest, most hunch-over, miserable people in the world.
And you could look at that and be like, okay, well, that's, fun, but it just doesn't matter. But looking at through the scientific lens, there's been mountains of research that connect your postural patterns to, so we talked about memory acquisition.
Right.
But there's also been potentially dubious-ish research done in Harvard. There's an immensely popular TED Talk from Amy Cuddy that we referenced in the book. We also kind of go, because there have been people that refuted that, and then she came back with like her counter-refute, and it's like this whole thing. But what she found in her research was that people's hormones were actually connected to their movement patterns. And so when they were in that hunched over position, kind of like we were talking about before in the San Francisco study, when they're in that position, it's easier for you to access depressive maybe memories, or times maybe you were in a defensive state. Well, that's also tied into the way that you produce your neurochemistry and the way that you produce your hormones and everything else. And so what she found was just 2 minutes in that position, it would actually increase testosterone levels. Or, sorry, if they were hunched over, it would decrease testosterone levels, and it would increase stress hormones. So cortisol was the particular one they were measuring. And then the inverse would happen when they were in the aligned position. And so aligned position, like another word for that would be like Tadasana or mountain pose in yoga, just like a stacked upright position. Or think of like any time a athlete of any sort, whether they're blind or deaf or anything, they win a race. They win a race essentially in like the aligned position.
Oh, yeah.
They throw their arms up and they open up their chest and they're like, wow, you feel strong and confident. So your human organism, it wins a race the same way, no matter what color or sex or mental ability or disability or access to senses or whatever. Like, your body gets played the same way by your emotions anywhere on the planet.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, that's fascinating. What if we flip that around and we say, well, maybe we can start to play our felt state and even our production of our chemistry through kind of tuning our body from a movement perspective.
Yeah, and what got you personally interested in this? Like, was it bodybuilding, or was it just wanting to be the coolest guy at Muscle Beach, or what was it?
So I've been working with clients for 16 years professionally. It was like the beginning of starting to help people with movement and all that stuff. And over that time, I think it's just like a natural evolution to start to... Most people, if you look at like any kind of maybe physical therapists, or people that I talk to at least, or like CrossFit coaches or personal trainers or massage therapists, or I think eventually MDs and all like the forms of doctors. Typically, the tendency is we start off and we look at things from more of like kind of like a mechanical, scientific. Everything needs to be analyzed and measured in a beaker kind of thing. Like, okay, if I can't tangibly hold it in my hand, I just don't trust it. And that's like, I think that's a great foundation, because it's kind of like develops the corners in your house. It gets like the cornerstone figured out, the foundation. And then from there, you get tired of all the corners and all like the flat linearity, and you're like, we need some circles in this house. And so you start to I think a natural evolution. And if you started off with circles, you'll probably end up finding corners eventually. You'll be like, damn, we need some structure in these circles. So I started off very linear, needs to be measured. I need to be able to. That's why I like movement. Even more than like nutrition stuff, because nutrition's it's a little bit more like ethereal. Like you put the food into your mouth and then you kind of we'll see what happens. Movement's like, let me see you deadlift. I can break down the mechanics right now. That,
and we can weigh it and measure it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, let's shift your hips just half an inch this way, and oh my God, now you can lift that much more. Or oh my God, now you're not getting that pain there. It's very like fast, which is why I really appreciate it. But eventually, what naturally happened with me, and what happens with so many people in general, is you become more interested in like the psychosomatic part of the whole conversation. and how does this affect me at a deeper emotional level? And what drives a person to get up in the morning and do fitness in the first place, or when they're in a grocery store to not buy bullshit food?
What does? Like, what do you see making a difference for people you work with?
Well, I think a big thing is self-worth. So if you're a person that feels like you are deserving of the, spending the extra $2 on, organic whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, if you are that person, like, yeah, I'm that kind of guy. So like when you're in the grocery store, you make those kinds of decisions. And so it's a similar thing with movement. When you go into a conversation with somebody, if your belief is, and we're always naturally doing this, in any conversation, there was an interesting, another study. I'm into like study stuff. I apologize in advance. But there was one with, what's his face? Larry King. So Larry King, what they found, they observed whoever did, it's in the book, whoever did the study, but they observed Larry King conversations, and what they found was that if he was doing an interview with someone that was lower on the social hierarchy, they would kind of pace themselves to him. Pacing is a NLP, neuro-linguistic programming term. Okay. You're kind of matching yourself to them. Okay. We're going to naturally do it through this conversation. And then if he was with somebody that was higher on the social hierarchy, then he would match his tonality and pacing of his language and all that intonation to them. So we're always naturally doing that. We're always communicating with body language, and we're always attuning to each other. I don't know what my point with that was exactly, other than that I think Larry King is a special guy.
And the self-worth and identity.
Oh, yeah, your identity,
something
right,
that will trigger action.
Yeah, so your identity, thanks for bringing me back. So your identity and belief system of who you are will literally adjust the way that you move in conversation. So when you go into a place, if you feel like a piece of shit, if you feel like, oh man, I'm just not worth it, or I don't belong here,
right?
All of those are belief systems. It started off as just this idea in between your ears or wherever, and then it crystallizes into your carriage of your shoulders and the contraction around your diaphragm or your abdomen, or and then if you have that contraction in your physical body, then eventually a long-term contraction without relaxation turns into essentially like a dam inside of your body. And if you have that dam, then you have that buildup. If you have that buildup, you have stagnation. If you have stagnation, you have disease. Yeah. And so that's, you draw that back. You're like, oh, okay, wow, that started with a thought of just like, I'm not worth it.
Yeah. So you've talked some, I've seen some of your content about like how to reverse some of that damage that people are dealing with. Things like, the kind of arch in the neck that a lot of us have, and you've got a lot of techniques for that. I wonder, for people with back pain, I know it's a huge, broad topic, but where would you suggest they start? Because that's something so many of my listeners deal with. A lot of military folks, we wear these helmets, and then we've got night vision goggles, and they pull our heads down, and before we know it, we're not feeling very good in terms of back, neck pain.
Back pain is kind of slippery, similar to like nutrition. Yeah. So exactly where pain comes from, you could come at it from a Western perspective and, say that maybe there's inflammation around a joint, which is, irritating some of the sensory receptors, the pain receptors in that area. And it's like flagging this pain signal, or you could look at it, but then it's like, well, then you look at other different research and you see like, well, there's some people that their spine is like on the edge of explosion and disc herniation. Yeah. It's just like, wow, like you shouldn't, that's like bone on bone. Like you shouldn't be walking. And they're like, oh, I feel fine. What are you talking about? I'm good. And then there's another person has just this perfect idyllic looking spine, and they have like almost like fibromyalgia-esque pain symptoms where it's just like, no, I'm in agonizing pain. I can't get out of bed. It's too much pain. Yeah. That's just pain. Yeah. And so like, fuck, all right, well, shit, where's this pain stuff at? You could go from another more like Eastern perspective lens and, look at pain as like, have you done Vipassana? Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
Have you done it?
I haven't done it myself.
Okay.
So I know you're into it.
You're familiar with it. Yeah. So in that, they would refer to kind of like the irritants and the pain that would pop up while you're sitting there. They refer to it as samskaras, which is like means impression in Sanskrit. So like a deeply held impression. This is poignant in relation to like military stuff and PTSD and stuff. If you go through some type of scenario where you didn't have you didn't feel resourced enough in order to process that situation, and make sense of it and feel in control and feel like, okay, like I can move through this.
Yeah.
I can, I can maintain feeling my whole self, and not feel like I need to collapse under the pressure of this situation. If we're in that situation where we don't feel like we have the resources to process, you could label that as like trauma in quotations. Like, okay, trauma happened, injury happened, essentially, is the meaning of trauma. And so we have these various like micro trauma experiences throughout our life. And if we hold on to that, there might be a moment where, I don't know, you got in a car accident, or you got, someone close to you died, or you felt like you lost your job. You didn't know what to do with yourself after that. You didn't think you were going to be able to take care of your kid, whatever it may be. It's like, this contraction in your body, or, you're, a military situation, explosion, any of that stuff. You go deeper down that, a person can go to the point of actually being immobilized by fear, where they essentially like, their body disengages and kind of like plays dead in a sense. And just because the body stops moving doesn't mean there's not deeply held emotional contraction that's happening around that.
Right.
And the person needs to be able to purge that out. And if they don't purge that out, they keep it with them.
Right.
And then they start kind of occupying their lives, moving through the world, oftentimes with recreating that disaster, in a sense, to kind of actualize it, be able to live it out.
Totally.
So that you start finding reasons to kind of catastrophize various situations in order to recreate that trauma and that stress, as to open the window to like let it pour back out. So from like a Eastern Buddhist, sitting on a cushion and wondering why my back hurts and my hips feel like they're on fire. Or I'm, have a headache, or I'm, think that the person leading this is an asshole, or full of shit, or I got to get out of here, or whatever. All these thoughts come up. They would call that samskaras, which is these impressions starting to surface, essentially. So Rumi said the cure for the pain is in the pain. So if you can go to a point, as opposed to like kind of wobbling and sidestepping around the pain, sometimes I think it's perfectly appropriate to acknowledge the pain, and say, okay, cool, I can be with that. I'm not attached to, oh, this hurts, like push it away. The same way that I wouldn't be attached to, oh, I love this, pull it back in. So it's like moving a little bit more equanimously is kind of what they recommend, is not being attached to pain or pleasure. So from their perspective, pain in the body would literally be like a deeper emotional holding pattern that's starting to surface to kind of talk to you. I think it's both. I think it's like anything. It's like it's like the Alan Watts talks about, like the, what does he call them, squiggles and prickles. So like the prickles is kind of like that linear coronary perspective, more like Western masculine. And then there's the squiggles, which is more like the the feminine Eastern type perspective. You don't really want to be, in my opinion, overly prickly or squiggly. There's time and a place for each. And so I think there's a time and place for Western medicine, and there's a time and place for Eastern philosophy and Eastern medicine. And so the pain conversation, I think it's helpful. I'm not really answering anything right now, but it's helpful to explore both. And
I think that is an answer, though, and it's something I've heard you talk about before. Is kind of pulling at two ends of the same rope.
Exactly.
If you can attack from both angles and start to explore things, you may find solutions rather than just hitting your head against one path.
And sometimes, language is powerful, so sometimes it's not necessarily attacking from both angles. Sometimes it is attacking. That would be more like the prickly approach.
Right, that's my classic.
Sometimes it's like, sometimes it's like gaining a relationship with both angles. Or listening to both angles. Or being with both angles. And sometimes it's fucking attacking both angles. It just depends on the moment. So I think that the more flexible person can be in their life and their humanity, like learn tools, learn how to listen, learn how to fight, learn how to fuck, learn how to climb, learn how to jump, learn how to sport, learn how to read, learn how to, adapt and bend to different ideas. Like everything that you do, if you do it intentionally, it has value. I don't think there's any one way to live life.
Right. You have this very both and philosophy, and you really embody it and live it too. And like even in your book, which you would think is a book about the body and the physical, but you talk a lot about people's emotions. You talk a lot about compassion. That's a big thing that I've heard you hit on. What do you think that there is about people's bodies and their ability to have compassion and connection with other people? What's that? What's that tie
what's the
in
relationship?
there?
Well,
Because it would seem at a glance like, oh, that's independent.
yeah, it's definitely not. Compassion for another person, I think, starts with compassion for yourself. And some people, I mean, I fall into this category, in a lack of compassion for myself, just to keep it granular and, actually like a real world situation. I started my existence as like a young boy being really obsessed with bodybuilding that you already mentioned. And that was, to me, was like me building myself up as a way to, essentially just show the world that I was enough and show the world that I'm like strong and in control and all this things, like very like common thing. It makes like a ton of sense. And so I think in that moment you could see, I think like a lack of compassion for myself, and a lack of like, I am, I love myself. Like here I am, like it's like this is my parents did this and my school did this and we ran out of money at this time or what it's like, but like throughout all of those situations, I think if you can start with that place of acceptance and like self-love, there's not necessarily the need to do something to compensate or do something for others. You can start with a place of like, okay, like I don't need to feel like I'm under attack. I can just breathe. If I have that compassion, like, man, like, this life, the experience from the outside, this could look pretty shitty. Like this is a tough moment. But nonetheless, in the moment, like I feel like I love this moment. I have compassion for this moment. And that's, if you can look at it from that perspective, it's like, okay, cool. Like I can relax, and then if I can breathe, then all of a sudden that creates that whole cascade of physiological change to the rest of my system. Okay, I'm calming down. I'm not producing so much of those stress hormones.
Yeah.
I'm not going through that whole arc of stress of releasing, norepinephrine and my pituitary glands juicing up the stuff, and I'm getting this whole like cascade of kind of going in ready to fight. Instead, I'm meeting that moment more compassionately. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like I can love this moment. I can love this person. If I go into a room and I think everybody's an asshole, or I think everybody's this or that, and I have this judgment, it literally forms the way that I move in that room. It might close my shoulders off to people, And then the other, like you mentioned, I'll contradict myself with almost everything I say. Sometimes it's perfectly acceptable to get really fucking angry, and sometimes it's perfectly acceptable to close yourself off to people. Sometimes it's perfectly acceptable to fight somebody.
Yeah.
There's moments where all of this stuff is completely acceptable. The difference is a person that can maintain that place of compassion or equanimity or balance. They're able to be the governor of all of that, as opposed to being governed by all of that. So if you're a person that does feel like you're coming from a place of like, okay, cool, like I accept and love, and even though this situation's kind of fucked up, like I still love it. You can operate just with greater control of the situation, and even if you are yelling at somebody or fighting somebody or beating yourself up in some workout thing, underneath that it's like, I'm doing this because I actually know from an honest place that I'm doing this through love. I'm doing this. I'm pinning this person down on the ground, or I'm yelling, cussing this person out, or because like that person, the only way that they're going to be able to receive this message, because of they grew up in some childhood thing, this, that, or whatever. The moment, it's like, in order to get the best results for this situation, that the end product is going to a place of compassion and love. Is for me to act like an animal.
To connect with that person.
Yeah, but I'm not consumed by that. I'm not lost in that. Because once you get lost in those emotions, then they're running the show, and then you're living a life more based on reactivity. And then you're just kind of like you're like an avalanche. And so it's, if you can pull yourself back, and this is kind of like a meandering idea of why compassion is valuable, and they're kind of disparate connections, but I think it somewhat makes sense. If you can pull back and gain some control through just like, something as simple as accepting oneself, accepting the moment, then that will change the filter on everything and change the way that you conduct yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Aaron, you talked about using breath to break those emotional cycles too, and you write at length about the power of nasal breathing versus the more stressful mouth breathing.
Yeah.
What's going on there for people who aren't familiar with that? And I really appreciated your deep dive in the book on that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's fun, man. Yeah, I appreciate your appreciation. So you can just play with it. If you are freaking out, if you get scared in a moment, your natural inclination would be to take a sharp breath in, probably through your mouth.
Right.
So as you're doing that, or if, say, you're at the top of a mountain, and you're like running out of air and you're 20,000 foot elevation or whatever, and you're like pushing your body at the fifth gear is what we refer to it as far as like the breathing breakdown of the book. So that's all tied in to the rest of your physiology. When your body breathes a certain way, that sends off this signal through everything else saying, okay, cool, we're at fifth gear. Or, okay, I'm frightened. It's time to bring that blood into the larger muscles and kind of get this body ready to like run the freak out the door.
Yeah.
It's not the time to rest and digest and heal and, do all of those things that are more like things that you do when you're, when the war has stopped. But if you are stuck in a respiratory pattern that is like, okay, the war is on. That's like if that's where you're at, then you're selling the signal through the rest of your physiology. Okay, we got to go. If you can, in any moment, say you are in war, or a fight, or you're stressed out about some public speaking thing, or about to go out on a date or something, you're freaking out, your armpits are sweating, you're like, oh my God, this makes things so much worse. In that situation, you could emphasize long exhalations and nasal breath and things that you would only do if you were in a calm place. And so as you are exhaling, like think of any time that you are relaxed and you're looking out over a vista of some sort, you're looking out into the mountains, the ocean, whatever, your tendency would be to take a breath and you have that long exhalation, like, wow, just take it all in.
Yeah.
And so it's like in that moment of feeling safe and feeling, like, wow, this is great. I just want to take this moment in.
Right.
You go more into that long exhalation and literally tunes your nervous system to say like, oh, okay, we're calming down.
Right.
We don't need to gather all of our air right now. We're calming down.
Yeah.
And then if you take that through the nasal passages, it's also going to be activating more of the diaphragmatic breathing patterns. Which, it's kind of simple why that's happening. Like literally it's just a smaller passage for that air to go through. So as you're breathing through your nose, you can play with it now. You can literally feel around like the ribs and like down lower in the abdomen and the back. You'll start to get that pull. Those muscles start to come online. You have to activate those muscles in order to pull through a smaller passageway like your nose.
Right, I can feel it.
Yeah, and so as well, on top of that, as you're breathing through the nose, it's like it's filtering the air. Like your nose is built for breathing. That's what it does. And your mouth is built for, putting sandwiches and other people's body parts in, and your nose is built to take air in. And so on top of that, that longer exhalation, it helps with causing your body to become less sensitive to CO2. So when you need to take a breath, when you need in quotations, you don't need to take a breath, as often as you think you do for the most part, unless you're already practicing this stuff. But when you think you need to take a breath, you're feeling a buildup of CO2 in your bloodstream. And then you're, okay, I gotta discharge and get that stuff out of there and do this again. If you start to practice a little bit more restriction, kind of like food restriction, fasting is great depending upon the person. This is kind of like practicing intermittent air fasting. So you do that intermittent air fasting, then you will become less sensitive to that buildup of CO2. If you become less sensitive, it literally causes your red blood cells to become more rich with oxygen because it's getting the signal that there's not as much air out there. So if you're just like some fat bastard breather, just taking all the air in the room, it's like, dude, like save some air for the rest of us. Your cells are like, cool, this bastard's got all the air he'll ever need. I can just have the shittiest efficiency of oxygen through my bloodstream because he's just filled with air. But if you constrict that a little bit, it literally, not only does it, down-regulate and kind of calm your nervous system, but it literally makes your respiratory efficiency go up. So you become a more efficient breather. And then that long exhalation as well, or breath holds, or humming, is shown to dramatically increase nitric oxide in the bloodstream as well, which is helpful with circulation.
You said humming? Oh, I never would have thought of it.
Yeah. So just anything that's doing that, like that slow build up.
Yeah.
But that just breathing through the nose in general is also helpful with increasing nitric oxide.
And with the timing too of the longer exhalation, something that we did talk a lot about when I was in the military was box breathing, and we often talk about a 4-4-4-4 pattern. But you recommend a 4-4-6-4 to get that longer exhalation, right?
Yeah. So 4-4-4 is great for memory purposes. So 4 seconds in, 4 second hold, 4 seconds out, 4 second hold, and do that, as many times as you want. Yeah. I, in the book, just recommend adding a couple extra seconds. And if you're like a big honking fella with big old honking lungs, like you could maybe do, 6, 6, 6, 8, or however the pattern would go.
Okay.
If you're a really small person, maybe do less. If that's 4-4-6 is pretty easy for most people.
Yeah.
But as you get better with this stuff, you could play with kind of altering the patterns. The big thing is essentially that box breathing, or I call it aligned box breathing. It's just doing the same thing we were talking about before. So it's slowing that breath down, which causes you to become more efficient with your production of all the blood cells and all that stuff, red blood cells.
Right.
And it's just naturally bringing your awareness into your breath.
Yeah.
If you bring your awareness into your breath, then that you only have so much bandwidth at a time. So in like a single conversation, they say we have like 120 bits of potential bandwidth that we can be able to offer our conscious mind. So like a single conversation's like 60 bits, and then another conversation's like another 60 bits. And when we get to like 2 conversations, you'll notice that if, there's 3 people talking, you can try to understand all the conversations, like, or 2 different conversations going on, but it's like, it's pretty much impossible. I've like played with it. You're like, you can't do it both. You can't separate it. Like you can go flip to one to the other, to one to the other. But when a bunch of people are talking, it just becomes
right.
We just don't have the bandwidth. Unconsciously, we do have the bandwidth. Unconsciously, we have like this. I don't know what the number is, but it's like a buttload more than 120.
Sure.
It's like thousands and thousands of bits of information can be processed subconsciously.
Sure.
But as far as what we can actually analyze in the moment, it's quite low. And so when you bring that awareness into freaking anything. I mean, it could be the awareness of my hand on the table right now. My hand's on the table. I'm feeling, okay, cool. I'm feeling the fabric of the, whatever you call this sheet thing. And I'm like feeling maybe the weight in my wrist, and my bandwidth goes, okay, what's happening in my hand?
Yeah.
When I do that, the stress of, oh, I got to text that person, or, oh, I'm going to be late for that thing, or I got to get that bill coming up. Or,
yeah.
Oh, I should have said this to that person, or, whatever, all that stuff. It just can't be there. It can't exist. And so if you practice being in a mind where all the static minutia bullshit, it just can't exist because there's no space. It's kind of like having a suitcase, when you're traveling. I'm going to Bermuda or whatever. And you're like, cool, like we have options. We could bring like this huge honking, 2 big sets of suitcases, and I bring all my clothes, and you'll fill those suitcases up.
Yeah.
As big as the containers, you'll just fill it up. So it's a similar thing with your thoughts, like, except with your thoughts, the suitcase is pretty consistent. And so if you fill that up with like, okay, well, I already brought paying attention to my breath, and I already brought paying attention to the temperature of the room. I already brought paying attention to the weight in my feet, or the light. I've already brought that.
Yeah.
So now my suitcase is filled up. So now the man, screw that chick, or oh man, I wish I would have done this, or like the subjunctive form of language that doesn't even exist in every language. Like Vietnamese, they don't actually even have like the I would have.
Really?
Yeah, if I was there, I would have done this. That's all bullshit. It's all nonsense. You weren't, you didn't do it, so fuck off. Stop thinking about it. It's over. It's like, it's a non-conversation.
Yeah.
I would have done. There's no words beyond that.
Wow.
You didn't. Here we are.
Right.
There's nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
And so it's within that, if you bring your attention into where you're at, all that would have stuff, it just falls off. I mean, it should have fallen off, in the creation of the English language. But yeah, if you're paying attention to what's happening, would have just goes away, and then all of a sudden you don't just spin your wheels in nonsense.
Mm-hmm. And the mindfulness is the tool for really pushing that out and getting into something else.
Yeah, and it's not even a pushing out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, again, like I'm finicky about words, so I apologize in advance. But
I love it. The precision is so important.
Yeah. So it's literally, it's just like you need to fill the space.
Mm-hmm.
So like your mind, whatever that is, your belly, your heart. I mean, there's more sensory receptors or neurons in your digestive tract than there are in your spine.
Mm-hmm.
There's more in the brain, but they call your guts like the second brain or cat brain. There's like millions of neurons interlaced throughout that thing. There's a lot in your spine too.
Mm-hmm.
But so where do your thoughts come from? I don't know. But we have. I got lost again. I got excited about the cat brain stuff. Anyways. Fill up your briefcase with paying attention to stuff. And then, I don't know, I was talking about where I think thoughts come from. Where do you think thoughts come from?
Oh, man, that's a tough one.
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah. But I think what you were getting at, if I understood, was that we don't necessarily push out
stuff. Push out, yeah.
Because
but where do you think thoughts come from, though? That's a more interesting question.
I'm thinking like my jaw. Lately, like when I'm stressed, I get tension in my jaw. And I feel like there's a connection to my stressful thoughts and my jaw. That's what I got. Like, you could probably hear it click on the mic. Like,
that's interesting.
It's tense right now.
Dude, that's fascinating.
Thanks.
I feel like I thought you were kind of mocking it, but I think you're actually serious.
Oh, I'm dead serious. That's when you asked, it was like, where do I feel it?
That's
right
legit.
There. Yeah.
Yeah. So where did the jaw tension come from?
I don't know.
Do you notice it come up more when you're stressed?
Oh yeah, jaw and right side of my forehead. Like there's something going on here. That'd be a question for you. What's going on there?
Well, I mean, you just keep peeling the layers back.
Yeah.
At some point, if we go back to like the impression stuff, maybe at some point I was stressed out about a thing and I clenched my jaw down, and that emotion, that moment, that impression, it's like, okay, when I have that experience, this is what my body responds, the way it responds. Clench it down, ready to fight.
Right.
It's like, okay, now I still have that impression inside. I haven't processed that out. And so I haven't come to a place of like, oh, I love that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't come to a place of compassion for that moment.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is a bit like meta stuff, but I think if we can come to a place of truly loving that seemingly effed up moment, I was abused by my whoever, my uncle or my dad or my mom or whatever. I was in whatever the scenario is. If you can come to a place of like, well, because of that, I got interested in this podcast stuff, or I started reading a lot more and learning about things. And I decided to travel because I needed to get the fuck out of that house. And then I went to Italy and I met this girl, and it was great. It's like, if you can start to come into that place of really, truly loving every square centimeter of your existence, your physical body, and also your past and your future and everything. If something's not love, then I think it's just masked by fear for the most part, I think. And if we're afraid of a thing, holding on to fear, which I've got a bunch of fears, but if we're holding on to that fear, I think it's because on the other side of that, I think we're afraid that it will be even more unsafe. But it's like, I think on the other side of fear, for the most part, if you actually do the Rumi stuff and like the cure for the pain is in the pain, for the most part, I think is a bunch of love and compassion. And so I think that with like jaw pain and this and that, you could go, again, prickly approach and go Western side and say, well, I have this, plantar fasciitis thing, and I got like the drop on my right foot, and that causes the knees to kind of go valgus and puts this stress up into the hip to compensate. And then that kind of, because of the tilt of the pelvis, I have this scoliotic pattern, and then that goes up into like another side bend and tension in the suboccipital ridge territory. And then I have my mandible contracts down to balance that out. So it's like, okay, the jaw tension is a foot thing. I figured it out.
Right.
It was like, great, that's one story. That's great. And then there's maybe the other story of the impression thing. I think in the end, it's just like, just work from both ends of the rope.
Right.
And inevitably what ends up happening, if you do crack that code of getting your jaw to chill the freak out, which is probably not about your jaw. There's probably something else going on that's like the jaw is the symptom that it's like the flare that shoots up, saying like, help, like we need work.
Yeah.
We need find somebody or go someplace or change your diet or, whatever, maybe change your thoughts. So I think those flares can go up at any point in the body. But as you draw the layers back, it could be a lot of different things. It could be some impression. It could be a mechanical thing. But I think they're both the same thing. If you change the physical body, then inevitably you will change the way that the body interacts with the world and interacts with their mind. So if your body is chronic, I'll wrap this up because I know I'm going on, but if your body is, kind of stuck in quotations in like that defensive position, shoulders rolled forward, maybe I build up my biceps and my pecs and my abs, going to I'm like an armadillo in the front, full protection. Yeah. That body has a meaning. It's like there's a reason that person went to the gym and did those things. There's a reason they were attracted to those exercises. There's a reason they were attracted to those magazines and those supplements, and there was an agenda behind that, whether it was conscious or subconscious, whatever, it doesn't matter. In order for the person to structurally create change, they need to be able to emotionally create change, and they need to be able to create change that filter that they perceive the world through. So if you go through and start to open the shoulders up and soften the belly and soften the jaw, in order for that to actually happen, it needs to trickle back into the person's kind of like their filter, their identity structure, who they think they are. And if you go another direction and change who a person thinks they are, of like, you know what, I feel like I don't need to defend, and I feel confident, I feel like I can be soft. Or I feel like I can be as tall as I want to be in the room. And I feel like I don't need to shrink up. I don't need to feel like I'm like taking up too much space.
Right.
I'm hogging up all the air.
Yeah.
I feel like I can just be my full self in the room.
Right.
And if you don't like me, that's fine. It's your own business.
Right.
You go into that, okay, shoulders will come back, breath will change, the way that you look or don't look at people will change. Your need to stare into your cell phone endlessly to kind of disassociate from this experience in the world will start to change, which then that ties back into augmenting your structural patterns. Yeah, shit's all connected, man. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. So we will not have time to talk about floor sitting, but I'm glad we did that question instead because it got me thinking, and it was kind of like a personal session with you, which I value. And I'm thinking now too, my dentist told me that I grind my teeth at night. And so now I'm realizing like this is a bigger pattern, that there's like a tension, and then I even take it into my sleep. And
it feels very convenient to stop at the symptom. And it feels very scientific, and it feels very like, yeah, cool, like we got it. But oftentimes it's like we think that we are curing the symptom by doing the thing that we're doing, but oftentimes it's, placebo and nature and time that actually does the curing. And we're all hot and bothered about our, all of our tools and gadgets and supplements and this and that. And it's like, well, don't forget that all your tools and gadgets and all that stuff was also, a lot of like, in some ways, a lot of like smoke and mirrors to get your body to believe that it can heal. If you give the organism the belief that it can heal, it starts to heal, changing that organism's filter on the world. Right. If you give a person a sensation of, I'm not getting out of this, that's trauma. So it's okay. Now we're creating that injury. Right. And it's like that nocebo effect of like, yeah, you're fucked. You're real fucked. And in that situation, I'm like, okay, well, I just fucking collapse. Like, there's nothing I can do in this situation. But if you instill the belief into a person that like, no, I can get through this. It's like the central governor theory is a thing that a guy called Tim Noakes in South Africa. I have on my podcast, I think, maybe a couple times, at least once. And he's amazing. And he gets into the psychosomatic relationship of how in endurance races we have a perception of the time left in the race and the distance that we've run, and that will literally kind of turn our physiological toggles, saying, okay, cool, like I feel energetic, or I feel like I'm going to collapse, right? Based off of your perception of where you're at in the race, right? So if you tell a person, if they somehow believe that all of a sudden there's only a mile left in the race, even if they were at the edge, like hitting the wall and all, and like, I'll fall apart, it's like around like halfway through, it's more likely they're going to feel that way because I don't think that I can get through this. Mm-hmm. But once you give the person the glimmer of light, like, no, I think I can get through this. You're like, oh, fuck yeah, I'm getting through this. Right. So we start to, it's all mental, man.
Yeah. I don't know.
And it's all physical.
Right. I don't know if it was Noakes or somebody else in that central governor sort of world who they did the study too, where they gave people just a taste of Gatorade. They didn't even consume it.
Absolutely.
And then performance went up.
Oh, yeah.
So, Aaron, if people want to know more of what you're up to, before I ask my last question, where should people look for you online?
Everything is Align podcast. So the book's called The Align Method, and I don't really talk about what the book is, which, you did a great job of trying to keep me on target, but then I just didn't really allow it, so that's just the way it goes. But the book is about, for people that are tired of the necessity of like going to a gym or having a trainer, or anything. I think all those things are very valuable. But if that's not your bag, your whole life is a gym. Mm-hmm. Every moment throughout the day, it's just a bag of opportunities. And we don't really get educated on those opportunities. And so what we did with creating the book was broke that down into a simplistic way that you can be aware of, like when you're sitting down, the way that you're sitting is a part of your fitness. The way that you're breathing is a part of your fitness. Literally everything you're doing is a part of your fitness. Mm-hmm. And so we broke down really simple fundamentals that you would learn in any weightlifting or dance or martial arts. There's consistent fundamentals of movement that you would get in all of those, that we put the golden thread out of all of that into the book for people. And then getting into other aspects, like the way we can change our environment and our office and our travel and all that stuff. So it's written in very simplistic forms for people that want to expand the conversation of what fitness means. And then Align podcast, I've been doing that for the last while. And that's been like similar to you. It's started off as a passion project. Now it's become a career, which is exciting for me. And I have an online program that's also the addendum to the Align Method book.
Okay.
It's called the Align Method online program. And the first week of that is free, so it's a 7-day free trial. And then it's a 6-week program that breaks down, focusing particularly on like unwinding tension and stress and pain around like the neck and jaw and places like you're talking about. All those like hunchy, collapsive type patterns, roll forward shoulders, back pain, all the stuff that people are going through by sitting on chairs a lot and traveling in airplanes a lot and looking at phones a lot, looking at computers a lot. Yeah. There's consistent patterns, and we broke down in very tangible, accessible ways how to unwind that stuff.
Awesome. Yes, and since we did not get to talk about the book as much as we would like, I will make a book summary episode as well. For anybody who wants to check that out, that'll be my next episode. And we'll put links to the book and the program and your social media in the description as well for anybody who wants to check out more from Aaron. And Aaron, my final question, I'm going to get a little floor sitting in. What's the first thing people could do if they want to start to practice some floor sitting?
Well, a simple, really worth the price of admission of like listening to the podcast to the end is just when you're sitting in any chair, including the floor, because the floor is just a big chair, at least as far as like history goes. Make sure your hips are above the height of your knees, and when you're in that position where the hips are just slightly above the height of the knees. So essentially, like when you're sitting down, if you put a golf ball on your thigh, it would like roll downward. So ideally, right now, it's fine. It's not the end of the world if you're not in this position. But ideally, right now, I'd put like a little cushion underneath my butt. But it's okay. So if you're in that position though, where that ball would roll down the thighs, then that will set your pelvis up to be in a supported position. So the bottom vertebra, which this may or may not be interesting to people, but the bottom two vertebra, the L5 and S1, so it's like the base of your sacrum going into your lumbar spine, those vertebra are more shaped like a wedge. And so that wedge with the big side facing your abdomen, facing forward. And so structurally, your body is built to be on the front edge of those little bones in your butt cheeks. And when you're sitting down, if you just raise your hips up, you'll naturally be put into that position, which then sets the rest of your spine up to be stacked and aligned. If you do that, then all of a sudden your breathing efficiency becomes better. So now all of a sudden your body can calm down because it's not feeling like it's kind of like dysregulated, at least from like a breathing perspective / mechanical perspective. So that'd be a big thing. Big takeaway would be get cushions and pillows and yoga blocks or whatever you need. And make the ground comfortable. It shouldn't be something where you're like bloodying your knees on cold tile. It's like get comfy rugs and cushions and Moroccan poofs and like make it like a whole vibe. And make sure that your hips are above the height of your knees when you're doing it. It's a very big deal. If you're not doing that, for most people, it would be very uncomfortable. For people that are like super stiff, hips being above the height of your knees when you're sitting, it might be like 3 feet of cushions. For people that are less, it might be like no cushions. So that would be the big thing.
Beautiful. Aaron, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Awesome. Good times.